Hi, this is Catherine Morgan-Nance with a review of activity-based costing. Thanks for watching. This presentation is split into two parts for your convenience. In part one, we review concepts and terminology. In part two, we will walk step by step through an example and discuss the implications of implementing ABC. As you have learned previously, overhead costs cannot be easily traced to products. Using a plant-wide predetermined overhead rate, as described when we discussed job costing, is simple, but using such a rate may not accurately assign costs to products. Activity-based costing, also known as ABC, is an alternative that attempts to correct these inaccuracies. Specifically, one of the great benefits of an ABC system is that it can help a company identify where current processes can be improved. Activity-based management focuses on managing activities to eliminate waste and reduce delays and defects. It may be used in manufacturing and service organizations as diverse as hospitals and the U.S. Marine Corps, for example. Activity-based costing is often used either with or in addition to traditional costing systems. In some cases, due to ABC's complexity and cost, it may be deployed outside of a cost accounting system. Either way, the goal is the same: to identify inefficiencies that cost the company money. Because ABC's focus on correlating cost with activities that cause cost, it is more accurate than plant-wide or departmental overhead allocation methods. And finally, once activity-based costing is put in place, overhead costs are often reassigned from higher volume products to low volume products. More on this in part 2 of our ABC video series. In general terms, three common approaches are used to assign overhead costs to products. In the interest of simplicity, companies often establish a single plant-wide overhead pool for an entire factory that uses a single allocation base, such as direct labor or machine hours. Direct labor, as an example, is an obvious choice because direct labor information is already being recorded when products are made. However, the plant-wide rate is the least accurate approach to overhead allocation. And as an alternative to plant-wide overhead rate, many companies develop departmental overhead rates. The nature of the work performed in a department will determine the department's allocation base. For example, the maintenance department's hours may be allocated based on the number of hours spent maintaining different areas or different machines in the factory. Because they more closely align costs and cost drivers than plant-wide rates do, departmental rates are more accurate than plant-wide rates. Now, the most accurate approach is activity-based costing. ABC is a technique that uses numerous allocation bases in an attempt to assign overhead costs more accurately to products than the plant-wide or the departmental approaches discussed so far do. The basic idea of ABC is simple. We are trying to figure out what activities cause our products or other cost objects to use valuable company resources. For example, receipt of a customer order triggers a number of activities. Examples might be entering the order in the system, purchasing needed materials, setting up machines to produce the order, shipping the order, and invoicing the customer. Performing each of these activities consumes company resources such as machine time and labor time. Finally, the consumption of resources costs money. And with that framework in mind, let's cover some ABC terminology. Overhead is allocated using the concept of an activity or a cost driver. Activities cause costs to be incurred. An activity in an activity-based costing system is an event that causes the consumption of overhead resources. Most companies have hundreds of activities. Examples include inputting a customer order, purchasing materials, stocking shelves, meeting with audit or tax clients, setting up machines, admitting patients to a hospital, billing customers, and opening an account at the bank. Now, when we learn anything new, it helps to understand the overarching goal. For ABC, our goal is to define how much of each activity, and therefore cost related to that activity, a product uses. Let's define some additional terms used in activity-based costing. An activity cost pool can be thought of as a cost bucket in which costs related to a particular activity are accumulated. These costs could be related to a company's purchasing or billing functions, admitting in the hospital, or setting up machines. An activity measure expresses how much of the activity is carried out. It is used as the allocation base for applying overhead costs to products and services. Examples of activity measures are the number of purchase orders issued, number of customers billed, number of patients admitted, and number of times a machine is set up to run a batch of a product. Finally, an activity rate is a predetermined overhead rate in an activity-based costing system. Each activity cost pool has its own activity rate that is used to apply overhead costs to cost objects. Activity rates are calculated by dividing the overhead cost in a pool by how much of the activity is carried out in the pool. Taking each activity in isolation, this system then works exactly like the job order costing system we discussed in a previous video. We first accumulate our overhead costs for each pool. We then compute a predetermined overhead rate for each activity equal to overhead costs divided by activity. And finally, we apply overhead costs to jobs and products based on the amount of activity consumed by the job or the product. As mentioned previously, companies can break down what they do into hundreds, if not thousands, of activities. It would be ineffective to try to trace costs to products or customers for every activity a company performs. In other words, management must limit the number of activities tracked in their ABC system. To do so, it is important to decide what activities will be included in the ABC system and how they will be measured. One common approach is to group activities together using a 4-level hierarchy of unit, batch, product, and facility level activities. Let's explore these activity levels on the next slide. As just mentioned, a common way to group activities is by whether they are performed for individual units, for batches, for products, or very broadly at the facility level. Well, what does that mean exactly? Unit level activities are performed each time a unit is produced. For example, hand packing a bag of ground coffee or processing units on machines are unit level activities. We can measure these activities based on the number of units we produce, or perhaps find a correlation with machine or direct labor hours. Now, batch level activities are performed each time a batch is handled or processed, regardless of how many units are in the batch. For example, setting up equipment to run a batch of the product and shipping customer orders are batch level activities. Turning on an oven to make a batch of cookies is an easy way to think of batch level of activities. You turn on the oven once for each batch, not for each cookie. Batch level activities are measured based on how many batches are executed during the year, such as how many times machines are set up to make a product during the year. Product level activities relate to specific products and must be carried out regardless of how many batches are run or how many units are produced and sold. For example, designing, testing, or advertising a product are product level activities. Remember, you will design a product hopefully once, not each time you manufacture a batch or unit of it. An activity measure related to design costs, for example, would be hours of design time. Facility level activities, then, are carried out regardless of which products are produced, how many batches are run, or how many units are made. For example, heating a factory and cleaning Executive offices are facility-level activities. Most often, the allocation base for a facility-level activity is the hardest to determine or directly associate with cost. Facility-level costs are often allocated using an activity measure that's very generic, such as direct labor hours or maybe square footage. And managers should be cautious when evaluating the impact of these types of costs on product cost and profitability because the allocation base is so broad. We'll take a break at this point. In part 2 of our video, we'll review an example of ABC costing and talk about some of the implications of using such a system. See you soon.